So today I'll talk a little bit about how to grow peppers. Now, peppers are typically a warm season crop, and they're related to the tomato. So there's a lot of similarities on how to grow them and how they kind of open up from seed, and some of the things you'll do for maintenance purposes. The one thing that's really nice about peppers, though, are they're not quite as high maintenance as tomatoes are, and so there's less things you have to do at the beginning, and definitely less things you have to do during the growing season as they mature. Now, peppers being a warm season crop, I typically don't plant my pepper seeds indoors right away. I typically grow the cold hardy and the frost hardy vegetables first, and I'll grow my peas and some of my cool season crops first, and then I'll do the peppers and tomatoes about the same time. Um, Peppers typically like just a tad warmer temperatures during the daytime, about 70 degrees. A lot of other vegetables, they're okay at 65, but or 60 even for the peas. But peppers do like it a tad warmer, around 70 degrees. They thrive. And then the nighttime temperatures, just like most vegetables, they do like a minimum of 55 degrees. So usually I sow my tomatoes and peppers at the same time, as long as I look at kind of the scheduling and I think, okay, I'm going to get 70-degree daytime temperatures and I'm going to get at least 55 degrees at night. Then I'll go ahead and plant my seeds indoors, anywhere from about 4 to 8 weeks, or 4 to 6 weeks, based on kind of the scheduling of how I think the outdoor temperatures will be when I transplant them outdoors. Because I'm growing mine in tiny little buckets or K cups, or even I transplanted the seedlings from the Jiffy Pea pellets over into these aluminum cans, because I'm going to go ahead, and its final resting place is going to be a hydroponic ice cooler. It's very easy to move them about, so it's not that big of a deal. So I typically go ahead and sow my seeds about 4 to 6 weeks prior to being indoors, and I use either seed starting trays, or I do the Jiffy Peat pellets. You can go ahead and do them in perlite or rock wool. The only problem with doing it in straight perlite, though, is the soil medium's kind of weak. And with tomatoes and peppers, they really have a hard time staying upright early on in its premature mature phase. And then on top of that, it needs a little bit more nutrients than like peas do. And so I noticed that it kind of struggles to establish itself and be a strong, healthy young plant. So I've noticed that it's much more efficient to grow pepper plants in Jiffy Peat pellets. It gives it the enough nutrients it needs to be successful when it's a young, tender age. So I typically just stay with the seed starting trays and use seed starting potting mix, or I use the Jiffy Peat pellets. Now, the um, the peppers themselves are pretty low maintenance. Once they're anywhere from about 4 to 9 inches tall, they can go outdoors. I usually grow them in a kind of a dark, warm area, and typically what I'll do is, as soon as they start sprouting, of course, I'll put them by the grow light area, but I'm typically not going ahead and put them in the grow light directly underneath when they're young. I'll put them off onto the side, and then as they start maturing and bringing out their first and second set of true leaves, I kind of inch them closer and closer to the grow light until they're directly underneath that. And then it is important, as soon as they sprout, to give them a lot of natural light. Now, as soon as they're a few inches tall and they've already set their second and possibly their third set of true leaves, and as long as daytime temperatures are above 55, I bring them outdoors slowly at first, 30 minutes to an hour, for about 3 days first, and then increase that amount over a couple weeks, because just like any other vegetables, they like natural light. Even if it's a cloudy day, natural light is a really good source for them. So I usually pick a cloudy day and a cool day first to start hardening them off for 30 minutes to an hour on the first 3 days, and then I'll bring them out on a daily basis as long as temperatures are above 55. Now, by the time it's hardened off fully, they'll be spending all day outside, and even if it's a cloudy day, just natural light is very helpful to growing pepper plants. So that's kind of something that I pay attention to. Now, pepper plants tend to get a little leggy if you keep them indoors too long, so that's why it's also very important to uh, bring them outdoors and give them enough natural light. Now, with pepper plants being a warm season crop, I know some people will go ahead and start them indoors just right before or right after the frost period. It all kind of depends on what zone you're at, because for some of us, if we're in a zone where the frost lingers, we want to get a real jump start on it on our pepper plants, and others who the frost period ends a lot sooner and we get closer to 70-degree weather a lot more fairly quickly. We don't have to worry too much about the starting the season indoors as much. For me, I'm in zone 8B in the Pacific Northwest. The frost ends pretty quickly, but sometimes the nighttime temperatures don't get up to 55 degrees for a while. And so I just kind of do the bringing indoors and outdoors on and on, on a regular basis until we get consistent weather above 55 degrees at night. We're still here in the approaching the, I think we're in the second week of May now, and we're still having nighttime temperatures between 43 to 48 degrees, so it's still a little too cold to bring out here. So I think we're still at least a full week to 2 weeks away from bringing them out here into its final resting place. Now, as the peppers grow, what you want to do is whether you're planting in a raised bed, a pot, out in your garden area. Typically, pepper plants like to have about 8 to 12 inches of space between each plant. Now, depending on the type of pepper plant you have, it will go ahead and tell you exactly how much space you need. Now, the pepper plants that are down below there, the small ones on the far right, those are, I think, sweet mini bell peppers. And I can get away with 8 to 12 inches spacing for those. Now, for the regular, like bell peppers and the jalapeno peppers, they typically like anywhere from 18 to 18 to 24 inches apart. So being aware of the type of peppers you have will kind of dictate exactly how much space you need to give them. Also, how you prune them or don't prune them will be important too. And so with pepper plants, some people prune and do light pruning maintenance, and some people do a full pruning situation, and then some people don't prune at all. I've done all three, and it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve too. If you went ahead and you were busy or just didn't want to bother with pruning at all, pepper plants will be just fine if you don't prune them at all. If you have the time and you're able to prune a little bit, that's also helpful. One of the biggest main things the reason why I do kind of right in the middle of what I call light pruning is I don't want it too dense in the middle, because pepper plants, like tomato plants, do get diseases and fungicide if the leaves get wet or there's not a lot of airflow in the center of the main stem area. Sometimes you let it grow and it grows a little wild, and all of a sudden you have a dense foliage in the center. Well, as the rains come, or you water it, or you get the morning dew, it traps in that wetness in the center. It never gets enough air through the center, and then it causes a lot of disease and fungus. And so I do like to do at least some light pruning as the mature leaves and as the denseness starts to form in the middle. Now, for some individuals, they'll go ahead and only keep a few main stems, because they want the energy going to the main stems, and then they are trying to grow the peppers more vertical. and they, for spacing purposes, they want to grow taller. That way, it's not so bushy and taking up much of their garden space. They want to be able to use their garden or their raised bed space as much as possible. Now, other individuals will make their pepper plants more bushy because they don't want the pepper plants can easily topple over. Now, for myself, I grow mine in the hydroponic coolers, and for spacing purposes, I do kind of want them to grow a little bit more vertical because the bushier they are, the more they're going to take up space in the yard, and I have a lot of plants I need to put down, and so I don't want them to sprawl out. I'm okay with taking the time to stake them to keep them upright because they will get a little heavy or a little top heavy sometimes by not pruning to make it more bushy. When you make the pepper plants more bushy and they more kind of spread out on a horizontal basis, it doesn't topple over nearly as much. And so if you're growing in a pot and you have plenty of space and you want it to grow to the left and right of the main stem, then it will more than likely be a pepper plant that you don't have to stake and bother with, and it'll stay upright. And so it kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve. I've seen both methods, and both methods work just fine. So it's all a matter of personal preference, really. Now, pepper plants do like their soil slightly, just tad more acidic than the medium level. So if you're looking at a pH stick and it's anywhere from 0 to 14, 7 is considered right smack down the middle. Pepper plants typically like a acidity level about 6 to, they'll tolerate right down the middle of 7, but just a tad to the acidic side. I don't really do a whole heck of a lot to keep the soil more acidic. A lot of the soil I use has already peat moss already ingrained or mixed into the mix. If I had some extra Jiffy peat pellets that were used from other seedlings and I had them lying around, I might take that extra dirt and go ahead and sprinkle it on top of my soil. But I grow a lot of my pepper plants in hydroponic solutions, so I don't really typically have the acidities or the alkaline soil situation. But if you chose to go ahead and you had some leftover peat moss, and you wanted to sprinkle the tops and then kind of work the last half inch into the pepper plant soil, that would be just fine. That way it would kind of hover more toward the 6 range of the acidic soils. Now, when you do plant your pepper plants, you typically you want to go ahead and kind of stay away from areas that you grew potatoes, eggplants, and tomatoes in the prior season. Just the kind of chemical breakdown of that sometimes isn't as helpful and may cause diseases to form. And so if you grew potatoes, eggplant, or tomatoes in a certain section of your garden, try to avoid growing your peppers in that same spot the following season. Now, the soil temperature, whether you're starting indoors with your peat pellets or your seed starting trays, we are kind of aiming for a 70-degree temperature. They actually can germinate anywhere from 70 to 80 degrees is kind of ideal for it. That's why if the nighttime temperatures or even the daytime temperatures are too cool outside, they'll have a hard time germinating if you try to germinate outside in under 70 degrees, like if the temperatures are between 55 and 65, it'll take a long time to germinate if they even germinate at all. Then you'll go ahead and plant those seeds about a 1/4 inch deep. Hopefully you've watered your tops with your potting, with your seed starting potting mix already prior to adding in the seeds. You'll do that, get them all thoroughly moist, and then you'll kind of add a little bit more water after you've actually planted your seeds into the soil. Now, I usually go ahead and, like I said before, I harden my plants off a lot over a longer stretch of time than most people do. I'll harden mine off for a minimum of 2-3 weeks before they're out here fully. But I've seen friends harden off their pepper plants in under 10 days. And, as long as nighttime temperatures are about 55 to 60 degrees, then you could go ahead and bring pepper plants outside to its final resting places. They do like the hotter weather, just a tad hotter than most of the other vegetables, even about 5 degrees hotter than what tomatoes like. Tomatoes can go ahead and withstand about 50 to 55 degrees at night. Peppers just need a little bit warmer weather, about 55 to 60 is the ideal for them. Also, if you're growing the big bell peppers or any bushier peppers, and you need to make sure that you have spacing between the leaves of each of the individual plants. Make sure they're about 18 to 24 inches apart. If you're growing this a mini variety of peppers, the plants aren't going to get so bushy. You can get away with about 8 to 12 inches apart. Now, I've seen people go ahead and compact grow their peppers so they're because they have a raised bed and they have limited space, and I've seen that work just fine. You're just going to have to keep track of bugs and diseases, because if they get into a landing spot, they can wreak havoc very quickly. Pepper plants don't get nearly as many diseases and leaf issues like tomatoes do, but keep an eye on them. If you have some sort of infestation problem, use a little bit of neem oil. If you see diseases and fungicide growing on your leaves, pinch them off right away. A lot of taking care of your vegetable garden is just being diligent in inspecting it on a regular basis and taking a quick look at it and staying on top of it. Once you have huge disease and fungicide problems on your pepper plants, it's hard to save it, and it struggles throughout the whole growing season. And so if you see a few leaves having problems, go ahead and pinch them off. And if you feel like you're in a zone where you constantly have problems with your tomatoes and pepper plants, there's nothing wrong with spraying all your plants with a little bit of neem oil on a regular basis. If I have an extra solution left, I kind of probably spray my pepper plants with any remaining solution I have in my 1 or 2 gallon spray bottle. Typically, I have more problems with my tomatoes, so I spray my tomatoes every 2 weeks. And sometimes in the height of the summer, if I'm seeing more problems, I'll go ahead and spray every 7 to 10 days. And then if I have any solution left, then I'll spray the pepper plants with any remaining solution I have in the spray bottles. Now, typically with the pepper plants, they do need a little bit of fertilizer along the way. They don't need nearly as much fertilizer as tomatoes do, but with the peppers, I do use fertilizer on it. Now, in the past, I used to use the water soluble. Miracle Grow plant food, which worked really well on both tomatoes and pepper plants. But I also went ahead and last year, during the succession growing, the second and third succession growing of my pepper plants, I went ahead and I used this specific fertilizer that's for bloom, because we really don't want our pepper plants to have a lot of foliage. When it starts flowering, we want it to pump out more flowers and pump up more leaves and stems, right? And so I bought a specific bloom fertilizer, which was kind of made for things like peppers, where I want the fruit, right, the vegetable flowering. And so I went ahead and bought a bloom specific fertilizer, which promotes, when you're looking at the NPK, there's different things, right? With the NPK solution, the ratio on the 3 main ingredients that are needed to grow plants and vegetables, one is for roots, one is for foliage, and one is for growing the flowering, right? And so I went ahead and bought some specific fertilizer for the flowering, because I wanted to flower. Now, when it gets to the flowering stage, there's a couple things I want you to think about. Now, if you let your vegetables on your pepper plants grow to full maturity, it can slow down flower production on your peppers. But sometimes people want to pick them and do ripe they want to ripen on the vine basically. And if you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. If you were to pick your peppers 1 or 2 days earlier than full maturity, or a couple days before maturity, then what'll happen is the pepper plant will sense, hey, I need to go ahead and develop more flowers to produce more fruit, so that way the plant, the vegetables can go to seed, right? Because that's what the big goal is to fruit and to get those seeds inside of there to mature for future growth. And so by picking your crop a little bit earlier, the plant will continue to provide many more flowers along the way, which will give you a larger harvest and a longer harvest. So those are kind of things that you can kind of decide on later on and decide exactly what you're shooting for. Now, the one thing I forgot to talk about before was initially when your pepper plants start flowering, they're going to send a couple individual flowers early. I would go ahead and pinch those off. I want my pepper plants to be big, healthy, and strong. And the first couple flowers that they send off will go ahead and take away the nutrients and the energy, focusing itself on growing the pepper plant in its foliage. So initially for the first couple weeks, I go ahead and any flowers that it starts, buds that it starts setting off, I go ahead and just pluck them off. And so that way it's just working on just developing a good root system, developing a good main stem system, and developing a lot of foliage. So that way when it decides to turn the corner and starts setting its fruit and flowers, it's going to go ahead and do well. Now, typically, pepper plants need full sun, minimum 6 to 8 hours, and they like the hot weather. And so make sure to put it in a spot in your garden that is getting enough exposure. And so that's a little bit about pepper plants. Sorry, I kind of rambled a little bit, made it a long video, but I wanted to kind of go over things. Now, if you go ahead, if you have some questions or specific things you have or issues that came up, just feel free to message me and I'll try to answer the best I can. So that's a little bit about how to grow peppers, and hopefully that helped.